Welcome back to the Catholic Buzz podcast. Thanks for joining us again as we continue to talk about so many different things in the Catholic world. My name is Father Daniele, and I'm joined by my expertise team. It's Josh Sullivan over here.
Hello.
And Matt Van Milligan. Matt,
Hello.
welcome to you.
Hi.
What's really funny is maybe it's not funny, but well, okay, maybe it's funny. These things you hear of every once in a while, like statues that cry, or things that people see, and I mean, not too recently there was a statue, I think, of Mary that cried, and the whole town flocked to this woman's yard, right,
To see it cry?
to see it cry, and frenzy happens.
Yeah.
It's a lot of frenzy. So, but I have a couple problems with these things. Number one, I think if they're not true, then it causes a lot of problems for people, because people have taken their time and their devotion and their hearts. They've gone to see these things that they think is so true. But on the other side, people like look at those things and say, well, that's why I don't believe in miracles.
Yeah, exactly.
Because they're all fake and they're all a hoax and they're all these different things. So today, let's talk about some of those miracles. And, do people have to believe in all these different things? Because I think it reflects on the Catholic faith.
It does, really.
Yeah.
Yeah. For sure. I think one of the biggest issues is that it's not only like miracles. God allows miracles to happen for certain reasons, and the Catholic Church, when they go into, say whether a miracle is authentic or not, it's not an easy process. It's a pretty scientific filled. They look at all causes to potentially be, like, if whatever the miracle might be, they're looking for everything and anything and trying to disprove that it could possibly be a miracle through every step of the process. And they put lots of money towards this. Like, the Catholic Church actually pays a lot of money to debunk miracles. And what we find is, so then when it finally gets through all that process, I think one of the things that we have is the critics a lot of times say, well, the church or Christians in general, like, they do this to make money. And they got a weeping statue at their church to make money. And so then everybody comes and everybody wants to see a miracle, right? And so, and it does. What happens is you'll get people flocking to the area and trying to experience the miracle, or trying to experience a witness of God physically in front of us, like a physical miracle of some sort that they can see with their own eyes. And then you have the people, when we prove it as debunked or as a hoax or as whatever the case may be, all that kind of a miracle does is really just hurt people's faith. And then, like you said, give the critics a specific
Another opportunity to say, well, look what the Catholics are doing. They're investigating their own miracles. Of course, they're going to be true, or whatever it might be, right?
Yeah.
So what is the process of approving a miracle? Like, what happens to be able to approve something like that?
Well, it's like you said, that there's an onus on the church itself to verify a miracle, because on the one hand, the church believes in miracles.
Mm-hmm.
Right back to the Gospels. This is one of the main ways that Jesus demonstrated to people who he was. Mm-hmm. But that didn't stop. After the Gospel narratives. So there have been throughout history and even now. It's been kind of the church's role to kind of authenticate or distinguish between, on the one hand, you have an authentic miracle, something that is, meeting a really specific criteria, and edifying people's faith, and on the other hand, you have, in some cases, it's just like negative attention-seeking behavior. Worst case, it's outright fraud. So the church sets a really, really high standard, or a really high bar for what qualifies as a miracle. And we talked about this when we talked about Eucharistic miracles and kind of the subjecting these claims to scientific study. So I'm no expert on this, but from what I understand, once someone has an inclination that something might be miraculous, there's a process. You bring it to the bishop. And the bishop has the option of either investigating it further or, appealing to, a higher authority if it's above their pay grade. So it needs to meet a specific criteria. So on the one hand, it needs to be attributable to divine power, that this isn't something that could have just occurred naturally, or, and, you gave the example of you see an icon on toast, or, there's probability and toast patterns and grain. Like, there's a possibility that it might look like a face. Like,
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
just, that's something that could have very easily have a natural explanation.
Would you eat a toast that had the face of Jesus on it, let's say, or resembled Mary?
Probably.
Like, what else
Yeah,
would
yeah,
you do with that,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
If
Is
the
that is that
grains
be-
matched up?
Is it before or after you put butter on it? Like, that's the question, right? Like, if it's already got butter on it, I'm sorry, it's going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The second criteria
Yes.
is that it actually needs to be beyond the abilities of nature. So look at the kind of the gospel, raising Lazarus from the dead. This isn't something that Jesus just did, and this is something that happens every day. This is something that is supernatural. It's extraordinary. It usually has to be outside of the proper order of nature. So it needs to be outside kind of your naturalist expectations. It needs to be extraordinary. So again, outside of the order, and you need to be able to sense it. And this is a criteria that people don't always think of. So if I said, I've experienced a miracle every time I'm alone in my room, a saint comes and like speaks to me directly and whatever. This can't be verified, or this doesn't meet that criteria of a public miracle or something that can be approved, because I'm the only one. It's private in nature. It's not something that can be verified by external sources. It's not something that the Vatican will send a commission to tell whether or not this is actually happening, because it's just located in my perception. It's something that needs to be kind of demonstrable.
As opposed to like your example of when Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead.
Yeah.
Like everyone saw
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Like it wasn't just something that was experienced by one person,
Yeah.
Lazarus, I guess.
Yeah, yeah,
He's just
yeah.
like alive again.
Yeah, and
yeah.
no, and just say that this is the case with the big miracles that we think of, like the miracle at Fatima or something like that. That
tens of thousands.
Yeah,
of people
it's
see
not
it.
something that someone just claims they saw, and
Yeah.
but this is also the case for kind of the smaller level miracles that we don't really hear about, that the church investigates all the time. Like even looking at the process of canonization. Like for someone to be moved from a blessed to a saint, like they need to attribute specific miracles to the intercession of this person. It was like, okay, so this person was healed of a disease that there's no medical explanation for. Whatever. Like those are the miracles that happen all the time, or that the church is more interested and invested in verifying, but they don't come with a lot of the sensationalism that accompanies these kind of fake or less likely to be authentic miracles.
It's amazing because you said that. So then it's something like the church announces saints a lot, right? Oh, a new nine saints just announced that the Pope just declared 9 new saints. Yeah. That means that there are, because I think it's 2 miracles per saint, roughly, and so that's 18 new miracles that were authenticated. Yeah. You know what I mean, and attributed to that. Now, it's not to say that there aren't times where the church has authenticated a miracle, and then through certain processes, things were figured out. Or like, let's say, so I have a one actually was in the 1953. The Weeping Virgin Mary statue is Sicily, and so it was actually declared a miracle. So a statue in the Virgin Mary's house started weeping and shedding human tears, and so what we could tell, and so then the Roman Catholic Church did what they could to like this is 1950s. So they did what they could. They figured it wasn't necessarily like they couldn't figure out why it was weeping and all that kind of stuff. And so they ended up declaring it a miracle. Thousands flocked to it. But then in 1995, so almost 40 years later, a chemistry researcher, figured out that the plaster statue readily absorbs water, and then had it leak through certain scratches and outer layers on the face of the statue. And so then the church, once they found that out and he could prove it, the church rescinded the miracle, like said, okay, this is no longer a miracle, and then apologized for people for saying that it happened. You know what I mean? And so the church has, I'm going to say, like, once the scientific evidence has come forward, then now when we have things like crying statues that cry, people flock to it, and the unfortunate part is that people don't sometimes listen to the science behind it. And so there was a case, like of crying statues, and then or shedding tears sometimes of blood, and then the church goes in and tests those. And so another one that I had here was a 2004 case. where they found Mary bleeding a statue in Brisbane, Australia. Sorry, and so the statue was bleeding from the face, and the red substance was so what the bishop did was the bishop asked for an investigation, so grabbed some chemistry guys that knew what they're doing and stuff and asked them to investigate for him, and the red substance was found to be synthetic, not blood. The tears were commonly commercially available rose oil, and then 2 small holes had been drilled into the statue through which the liquid could have been injected. And then oil rubbed on the items would have wept when placed near candles or heat. So like when they lit the candles, then all of a sudden the statue started to weep. And so these were things that they figured out through their process. And so the church is that's in 2004. And so what happened actually was that somebody was actually arrested because of this one. And so the church investigated, found it to be false. And then because it was fraud on a massive scale, thousands of people were coming, the person who was kind of instigating all this was arrested. And in one case, I don't know if it was that one, but in one case it happened to be the janitor that was just making things happen and thought it would be interesting or fun, but got arrested and thrown in jail for fraud. So the church does authenticate these miracles sometimes, but other times they go in and they find out it's completely false.
Yeah, and I don't think the church jumps at the chance to approve miracles.
No.
Like, at the beginning of the episode, I was talking about the Weeping Mary statue. I said a few years ago. It was actually like 10 years ago. But it was in actually Windsor, Ontario. Do you remember?
Oh, yeah?
It was the ladies' front yard. Remember the statue of Mary was weeping? And I just remember the Bishop of London Diocese, which Windsor is in, they didn't, all this media, because for like 3 months, people were flocking to this neighborhood. The city was involved with trying to fence off stuff and
Not ruin neighbors' yards.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
and the bishop's office was kind of like, yeah, this is the first time we ever had a claim like this, and we'll see what happens. Like, it wasn't like they were jumping at the chance to confirm or even deny, really, that was happening. And actually in the same area, more recent than that, just actually a few years ago, it was in I believe it was a Byzantine church in Windsor. A statue of Mary they found was like leaking oil.
Oh.
And I guess they cleaned it up one day, like, what is this mess here? And they wipe it down. And the next day it was there, and even them, like, I think the pastor or whoever it was, the church was like, we don't need to see this to believe.
Yes.
This for us, if it's true, if it's oil, if it's holy oil, then it's a blessing for us. Yeah. But this is not why we believe, because of these signs. And I think that's sort of the trouble, where people take miracles like this and say, well, that's fake, so everything else is fake. Or
exactly.
If
your faith is based around that miracle, then you don't understand what the church is actually teaching, right?
Yeah,
like the church doesn't need that to be. We don't need crying statues.
And I remember, actually, Matt, your wife, she was telling a story a couple weeks ago at one of our preparation sessions in the parish, and she was telling a story about how her own crisis of faith when she was younger, you know the story, and she was saying she was asking God for a sign, and she didn't receive the sign that she was looking for, and she was telling the people she was talking to that would have become where she hung her faith on, like that would have become where she hung her faith, and that's not our faith. Like, our faith is beyond a sign or beyond a weeping statue or beyond a burnt toast or beyond. And I think that's true. People look to these statues and say, okay, well, what happens when the memory of that weeping statue disappears, or when the weeping statue stops to weep, or whatever? Is your faith that... Is it
fragile?
deepened at all? Or is it just going to go away now? And so I like the point of miracles is to assist faith.
Yes.
God gives miracles to deepen faith in people, but it's not the only way. Like, it's not the only way that God acts in our world. Going back to the story of Lazarus, people in the gospel, it was like they were astonished. And of course, this dead man wrapped in
3 days dead,
3 days dead. Remember the quote? There was a stench. Like, they rolled the stone open. There was a stench. Of course, they're astonished, and maybe there were people there that were like, oh, okay, this is the Messiah.
Yeah.
But I
and
don't
then-
think they hung their faith on
Yes.
that moment. I think they began to follow Jesus after that.
Yes. And chronologically, not long after that, presumably a lot of the same group of people were the ones yelling "Crucify" as
Right.
well. So it's just like that. If that becomes the foundation of your faith, or you're putting all your eggs in that basket, so to speak, your whole faith can be kind of built on kind of shifting ground.
That's right.
And I think one of the other important parts, like when they're investigating, you said it there, it's supposed to inspire faith. It's not like, so like, for instance, if we have our statue here on the set, if our statue on the set all of a sudden started weeping tears, the biggest question I think the church should be asking is, why? First of all, how and all that stuff. But like, if we can't explain it, then why is God allowing this miracle to happen? A lot of times the places that we see miracles are things like Lourdes, and I am the Immaculate Conception. Like, God allowed Lourdes to happen, and with Saint Bernadette, specifically to deal with a situation going on the other side of the world where the bishops were arguing about something. Like, he allowed this miracle to happen, to confirm an area of faith in the Catholic Church on a different side of the world, but he used that miracle for that. Fatima, same kind of thing. Like, he used these miracles that we've experienced recently, I'm going to say, for very specific reasons. And so, like, if all of a sudden a random statue just starts crying, the question is going to be why?
How is this upbuilding the church?
Exactly. How is this important? Like, other than just flocking millions to that church, like, what is going on?
And I think it's important to note for everyone to understand is just like some of the apparitions of the Blessed Virgin Mary, these miracles that are happening are not part of the deposit of faith.
No.
Like, they are not part of the deposit of faith. So that means that you don't have to believe in them.
Yeah.
Like, if you're like, oh, well, statues crying, big deal. There are two types of people who flock to statues and say, I got to see this miracle.
I got to touch it. I got to whatever.
I got to pray in front of it. And there are people like, oh, okay, well, it's crying. It's not something that Catholics have to believe in.
Yeah.
I think we talked about this when we talked about Eucharistic miracles, but like, as far as what's incumbent on the faithful, that even if it's verified, you're not required to accept it. But if it is, because you do have different classifications of once if they send a commission or if they reach a verdict on the authenticity, they can determine that it is supernatural in nature. No, it's not supernatural. It's a result of natural forces or deliberate human agents. Or there's kind of an uncertain. We can't verify at this point, or we don't have enough data or information to verify. If the church declares that it is not supernatural in nature, or you have this situation of deliberate fraud or just mistaken about kind of the causal forces that are creating this situation, the faithful it's incumbent on the faithful to actually reject that.
Hoax.
So you don't have to accept the ones that are verified, but you do have to reject the ones that are
the
rejected.
church says are not true.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. Like, so the other one that becomes to mind, and I don't know if you guys heard about this one, because this was happened in India, was the statue of Jesus started leaking water from his feet, and they didn't know what it was. So people, the caretaker at the time, she was cleaning up and noticed that there was water dripping from the toes of Jesus and kind of thing. And so she went and made it a big deal, and then people started flocking by the thousands. Media got involved and everything, and then when the bishop, so as the process does, the bishop goes in to investigate and see what's going on. And again, they ask why, they ask how, and they had somebody investigate. And the person that was investigating found out that it was a leaky sewer pipe behind the crucifix that was leaking out and leaking down the crucifix and down the toes.
Jesus.
And so but at the time, the people that were believing in this miracle, and they were kissing the feet of Jesus with this water and everything else. And so the person that discovered it, the bishop said no, like, this is not, like, we figured out this is not real, and the people just didn't agree with that, and then it went after the people that proved that it was a leaky sewer pipe, and so to the point where they had to run to Finland to kind of escape persecution and stuff, is what they said. Now, I mean, that could be dramatic and for a fact, right? But the idea being still that people weren't listening to the local authorities either. I mean, like the local authority under the bishop saying, no, this isn't right, and they're like, no. We don't care what you say. We're still, like, this is a miracle, and it's changed my heart. And Now, that's not to say, kind of like, again, we've talked about other areas in life, in the church's life, where things like Medjugorje or things like that, where the church doesn't have a stand necessarily, or doesn't, like there's churches like Miracles Like Fatima, where they say, yes, this is approved. And then they have places like, they have other places like, I don't know, Mary's Face on Toast kind of thing, where they're like, no, that's not a real thing. And then they have, or even like the statue or the weeping statue in Sicily, where they say, no, they rescinded the miracle. And then they have the places like Medjugorje where they don't say, like they're like, we don't know yet. There's too much going on here. And we've talked about that in another episode. So if you're interested in Medjugorje, go look at that episode. But the idea being that the church has those three responses and they do use them. And if the church says no, then it's a no, and we can't just go, well, the church, like the bishop doesn't know, and we have to respect that authority.
I want to, like, when I think about miracles, like, why, I always ask myself, why is there fanfare around weeping statues? Why is there fanfare around Jesus' face on toast or all that stuff? I think it's because deep within each person, there's an innate desire to believe. Like, there's an innate desire to want to believe in God. And like you mentioned, like, the media gets involved. Even though we live in a world where maybe they pretend to be not really interested in faith, or maybe even discriminate against the Christian faith, there is this curiosity towards God and Christianity. So when these things happen, for me, it's a reflection that there are people who are seeking the Lord. And miracles might not happen in your life, and miracles might happen in their life. This past summer, we went to World Youth Days in Lisbon, Portugal. And the group that we went with, we were sort of praying for a particular intention. We had asked our pilgrims to bring a particular intention with them. And we go to World Youth Days. There's 1.5 million people there. And there's this story that comes out from World Youth Day, that this 16-year-old girl from Spain who had been praying this novena leading up to her time at World Youth Day. She goes to Fatima and goes to Mass at Fatima, receives the Eucharist, and at the moment she receives the Eucharist, she had been praying because she's blind. The Lord would heal her blindness. And when she receives the Eucharist, her eyes were opened and she can see. So this sort of made headlines. Of course, you can imagine the joy in her, but also her parish group that came and the people around her that were there.
Everybody who knew her, I imagine, yeah.
And so that sort of stole the headlines. But I know for a fact that even in our group that went, there were little miracles that happened. Like people who had been praying for intentions, or people who had been praying for certain things, received those graces, received those little things. And some were big according to them.
Yeah, of course.
Like in the big for them, I should say.
Yeah.
So, the fanfare around miracles is, I guess it makes headlines, but God continues to work in our life.
Yeah.
Like God is always working in our life. He always wants us to know that He's journeying with us. So we should appreciate those. I think hearing our World Youth Day pilgrims speak about the graces they received in person, one-on-one, it was really encouraging, because these are little miracles that happen. Yeah. We don't need the media involved. Yeah. We don't need a headline. We don't need the Vatican to investigate or whatever it might be. But they're real. They're real because according to the Catechism of the Catholic Church, miracles are to strengthen faith.
Yeah.
And this certainly did it, right?
We see it actually in, like, if we're going back to Lazarus and stuff, we see it actually in the Acts of the Apostles, where people are performing miracles, and then the church, like, people start to ask, how do we know this is from God? How do we know it's not? And we have, I think it's St. Paul that says, test everything and hold fast to what is true. Meaning, like you're not actually, like, the church doesn't want you to believe everything. The church wants you to test. So put it to the wind, see if it holds the mustard, kind of thing, and if it does, then hold fast to those that prove to be true. So those miracles, those little miracles, if you don't know, and then all of a sudden a miracle is presented to you and you see it, you're supposed to pray in faith. You're supposed to ask those things. And when those miracles come through, then hold fast to what is true, what you know to be true in those. But if you see, someone, your neighbor starts talking about, Jesus appeared on the movies, I don't know, on the side of the building in the chipped off paint of the side of the building or something, then like go and investigate and then hold fast to what is true. If the church says no, then they might have investigated and said, nah, this doesn't make sense. There's no purpose behind this. Like God has appeared on the blockbuster behind my house kind of thing. Like that doesn't make sense. Versus where the church says, we don't know yet. We haven't, we're not willing to make a formed declaration, or we've approved it. Then you can feel pretty safe. If they've approved it, then it's okay to believe in. But again, if it's not, then test, hold fast to what's true.
And I think the important thing about testing is that these signs don't become troublesome for us.
Mm-hmm.
Like there are some things that there are people who take advantage of faith, right? There are people who will try and make a profit off something, and that's been shown with some of these miracles with crying statues or whatever. There, like you said, there was an employee or something who was trying to take advantage of the situation, and even in the scriptures, they asked Jesus, like, by whom does he cast out demons? Is it by Beelzebul? I think it's good to test. I think it's good to see. And if by chance Jesus' face shows up on a building, even if it was painted there by someone or whatever, if it honors the Lord, there's nothing wrong with appreciating it.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with appreciating it. But the difficulty is we don't pin our faith on this face of Jesus on the side of a building. We don't pin our faith on the statue of Mary that's crying or leaking oil
or bleeding.
God has done so many tremendous things in our life. If I had to ask you, like, what was either your favorite miracle or most bizarre miracle, what would you say? It could be a favorite of yours, or it could be the strangest thing.
I say favorite. Would maybe be the wedding at Cana and the water to wine.
Because you like wine?
No, because of the I do like wine. But the kind of theological depth of what's being communicated in that miracle. So it's happening at a number of levels. So
that's why Catholics drink.
And all of Jesus' miracles are working towards Jesus is showing us something. Even Lazarus, is a prefiguration of his bodily resurrection. But wedding at Cana, like the use of those symbols of water, of wine, which is a symbol for blood, like ceremonial cleansing, like Jesus changing large amounts of water. It specifies the jars full
of water.
That was used for ceremonial cleansing. He's changing, the imagery of water as a symbol for kind of spiritual cleansing to wine, which represents his blood. So it's like a prefiguration of the Eucharist. It's a prefiguration of the Passion, and it's all in the context of people enjoying a wedding. So like the multiple layers of what's happening there, the supernatural nature of what's happening, and that it's the first act
miracle.
of his public ministry. That's probably my favorite. Yeah.
Very, very neat.
I think for mine is Guadalupe. It's the story of Guadalupe, but also just the science behind Guadalupe. And so, for those of you who don't know, look into the story. But basically, Mary appeared on a cloak. She appeared, but she also gave her image so that the local bishop and authorities would believe the words that he said. She imprinted her image onto the cloak of this man's cloak, and he was just a simple man.
Yeah.
And when he opened up, roses fell out, and this image was on his cloak when he presented it. And the we can't do what we still to this day can't. We don't have the technology to do the evidence that we see printed on this cloak. We can't print to the size or the scale, the microscopic size or scale, to the intrinsic patterns that we see. It's not possible for us to do this now. And like scientists it boggles the mind when they study this thing.
It wasn't painted on the cloak. It was imbued in the material of the cloak in a way that couldn't have been done by hand.
Yeah. And so they and this happened, I can't remember the year, but it was years, 100 years ago or whatever the case may be. And so Our Lady of Guadalupe is an amazing miracle that I really enjoy because of the scientific aspect of it, and that's one of the first things. Even today, a couple thousand years later, we can't. And then I guess the other one is all the Eucharistic miracles, but we've talked about those before. But just because of the DNA, the science that have been put into it, that have been proven to be true, which
Those are my favorite.
Yeah.
Anything to do with Eucharistic miracles are my favorite. And I guess since I was talking about World Youth Days, we were able to go and witness ourselves the sight of a Eucharistic miracle, and I guess that has been my latest favorite miracle. And the story is kind of cool because. I think next week we're going to be talking about witches and
sorcery,
evil
and,
things. But that's the Eucharistic miracle, was that this woman who was having difficulty with her husband, right,
wanted to curse him or something.
wanted to curse her husband, or
yeah.
went to seek advice from a witch.
Yes.
Right? A soothsayer, as they say. A witch. And the witch told her to go and to the Catholic Church, go and steal the Eucharist. So she goes, steals the Eucharist from she goes to receive communion at Holy Mass. She takes it off her tongue, right? Yeah. And she takes her veil off. You have to wear a veil at the time to attend Mass. So she takes her veil off, puts the Eucharist in the veil, walks down the street, hides it in her veil, until an onlooker, like someone passing her on the street, alerted her that she was bleeding. From profusely bleeding. And she looked down, and from this veil where she had the Eucharist was like pouring blood.
Yeah.
And so she kind of freaked out.
Yeah.
Went back to her husband, kind of atoned for it, told him what happened.
They hide it in the chest or something, right? They hide it in the chest at the end of the bed.
And then like brilliant light kind of shone from the house.
Yeah.
They couldn't hide it anymore. So they brought it to the local bishop. Anyways, long story short, this bleeding host is encased in a monstrance at this church in Santarém, Portugal, where we visited just a few days after World Youth Day. We were able to see. And it's just stunning being in the presence of that. Like, you can look up and you could see it there. See it bleeding. And
the other thing too, because they encased it in wax first, and then the wax turned into crystal, right? Like it was crystallite, the pyx or something. That it was a wax. They encased it in wax to kind of either stop it from bleeding, but also just to hold it while they studied it or whatever else. And then that became overnight. It became a crystallized, and the crystal they can't, like, again, another thing that we can't recreate this type of crystal, this glass that like it basically perfectly embodied and perfectly covered over top. So that's also available to you to be able to see in the tabernacle right beside the Eucharist, which is really kind of cool.
It is very cool. But again, like all these cool miracles that happen, I mean, we can go on and name hoax miracles that have been embarrassing for people, but all these miracles that happen, like, this is not the reason why I love Jesus. It's not because that host bled in this small town of Portugal once. It's not, it's not because of Our Lady of Guadalupe. Yeah. These are moments these are moments that we can appreciate God communicating to us in various ways in our world today. Yeah. And they're not something that we hang our faith on. Right.
And like you said, you don't need to believe in any of these miracles in order to be Catholic. All these are private, after the fact revelation. Like, you have to believe the ones in the Bible, the ones that are in the Bible and stuff. And but the ones after the fact that the church has approved aren't necessarily required for you to say, yes, I believe in that or not. Right? The church.
And I'm always interested in hearing people's personal miracles, because I think a lot of people have a lot of divine intervention happen in their life, more so than we speak of. I could say a couple things. I'm sure the two of you could say a couple things, but that's something that we should share with people, because those are good stories. We don't need to enshrine these stories on a wall or for people to visit or whatever, but these are stories that are personal to us of divine intervention in our life. You hear, I've heard beautiful stories from people who've had miracles happen to them, and they're stunning.
Yeah.
They're just so beautiful, but people sometimes are shy to share them, right?
Yeah. And they don't have to be big miracles. Sometimes they're just little miracles.
Exactly. So how about this? We will ask those listening today if you have had a miracle happen in your life. Why don't you share it with us? Why don't you send us an email? You can send it to us at askus@thecatholicbuzz.com. You could drop it in the comments section of our YouTube video, of any of our social media. let us know if there's something that's happened in your life, because these are things we need to share. These are the things that need to share. Even if you've had a weeping statue of Mary in your yard.
We'll send the local bishop. That's what we'll
send
do.
the local bishop to verify it. We'll make sure. Okay. But yes, drop us a line. Let us know what if there's something that's happened to you. If not, let us know anything that's we talked about on this episode that you want to comment on. You're free to do so. So that's all the time we have on this episode of the Catholic Buzz. So for Josh Sullivan and Matt Van Melgen, my name is Father Daniele, and we'll see you next time on the Catholic Buzz.